The old garage sat quietly at the edge of a small neighborhood. It looked like a place forgotten by time. Its paint was peeling, tools were scattered around, and an old wooden sign above the door simply read, "Auto Repair." Inside the garage, an elderly mechanic worked carefully on a car's engine. His hands were rough, his back bent from years of hard work, but his eyes still shone with kindness and patience. Everyone who came here knew he was honest. He never cheated anyone. He didn't rush, but he always did the job right. His day was quiet, like most days now. Not many people brought their cars here anymore. Newer, fancier workshops had opened nearby, and this small garage was easy to ignore. Bills were piling up, but the old man kept working, more out of love for his craft than for money. Then late one afternoon, a sleek black car slowly pulled into his dusty lot. It was a beautiful car, the kind you didn't often see in this neighborhood. The engine made a strange noise, and as the car stopped, the driver stepped out. The old mechanic wiped his hands on a rag and looked up. He recognized the face instantly, but didn't react the way most people might. It was Keanu Reeves, standing there quietly, with a humble smile. "Hi, sir," Keanu said gently. "My car's acting up. Can you take a look?" The old man nodded. Calmly, "Sure, let's see what we can do." Keanu followed him as he opened the hood and leaned over the engine. The two men spoke a little, but their conversation was simple. Keanu asked if the man had run this garage for a long time, and the old man nodded, saying he had been fixing cars here for almost 40 years. He told Keanu that times had changed, that business was slow now, but he still enjoyed repairing cars. Keanu listened quietly, showing real interest. He didn't act like a famous person. He was polite, kind, and patient. He didn't seem in a hurry at all. After checking the engine carefully, the old mechanic explained the problem. "It's nothing too serious," he said. "Just a small part that needs cleaning and fixing." He worked slowly but skillfully, using old tools, but with great care. Keanu watched, leaning casually against the garage wall. There was no rush, no demands. It felt like two people simply sharing a peaceful afternoon. When the work was done, the old man wiped his hands again and gave Keanu a friendly smile. "She's ready to go," he said. Keanu thanked him warmly and pulled out his wallet, offering extra money. But the mechanic shook his head. "Just pay for what I fixed," he said gently. "That's enough." Keanu smiled again, a little surprised, but respected the man's honesty. He paid the fair amount, and before leaving, he said, "You've done a great job, sir. Thank you for your help." The old man nodded again, watching the black car disappear down the road. As the sound of the engine faded, he returned to his quiet workbench, thinking nothing more about it. For him, it was just another customer, another car fixed. That evening, as he locked up the garage, he paused for a moment and smiled to himself. The day had been simple, but somehow special. He didn't know why, but something about that visit felt different. And so the old mechanic returned to his quiet routine, not knowing that this simple act of kindness and honesty would soon change everything in his life. A few days passed after that quiet afternoon when the old mechanic fixed Keanu Reeves' car. The garage returned to its usual slow pace. The sounds of tools and engines were rare now. Most of the day, the old man sat quietly on a wooden stool, waiting for someone to stop by. But very few people did. The neighborhood around him had changed a lot over the years. New shops, big repair centers, and chain stores had taken much of the business. Most drivers preferred faster service, shiny new places, and free coffee while they waited. The old garage didn't offer any of that. Only careful hands and honest work. Bills continued to arrive. The rent was due, electricity had to be paid, and even small things like oil and parts were getting expensive. The old mechanic tried not to think too much about it, but sometimes at night, he sat by himself and wondered how much longer he could keep going. Even though he lived alone and worked alone, he wasn't bitter. His days were simple, and he found comfort in routine. But he couldn't help feeling that maybe it was time to close the shop, sell the land, and finally rest. His back hurt more now. His hands trembled sometimes. He had been fixing cars for so many years, but fewer and fewer people seemed to need him. His neighbor, a kind woman who ran a small grocery store nearby, stopped in one afternoon. She brought him a cup of tea and sat on an old crate beside him. "You're still working here every day?" she asked gently. The old man smiled softly and nodded. "It keeps me busy," he said, "even if there's not much to do." She hesitated, then said carefully, "You know, people around here talk about how honest you are. They respect you, but maybe it's time to think about slowing down." The old mechanic didn't answer right away. He looked around his dusty garage, at the tools he had used for decades, at the workbench that held so many memories, at the old cars he had repaired carefully with love and patience. He felt a deep connection to this place. It was more than just a shop. It was his life, but he also knew she was right in some way. Things were quiet now. Too quiet, he sighed, finished his tea, and thanked her for stopping by. As she left, she said softly, "You're a good man, people know that. Don't forget it." That evening, the mechanic sat alone at his workbench, turning a small wrench slowly in his hands. He thought about all the years he had spent helping people, fixing broken cars, listening to their stories, working late into the night sometimes, just so they could drive safely. But despite everything, no one had come in for days now. His small business felt forgotten. The visit from the polite man with the sleek black car almost felt like a dream. He doubted someone like that would ever come back. Celebrities didn't have time for old mechanics. Little did he know, something unexpected was about to happen. While he sat there in silence, far away, someone was thinking about him. Someone whose car he had repaired with care and honesty. Someone who had quietly promised himself he would not forget this kind old man. For now, though the old mechanic simply cleaned up his tools, swept the dusty floor, and closed the garage door gently as the sun set. Another quiet day was over. He locked the door, looked up at the fading sky, and walked home slowly, not knowing that this quiet routine was about to change forever. The old mechanic opened his garage early the next morning, just like every day. The same creak of the heavy door, the same dusty floor, and the same old tools waiting on the workbench. He put on his apron and made a cup of tea, hoping that maybe today a few cars would come by. But the morning passed quietly, and the garage remained empty. The sun rose higher in the sky, and the old man wiped his hands even though there was no grease on them yet. He sat on his stool, looking at the street outside. Life moved quickly out there. People passed by, cars rushed past, but none stopped at his garage. He didn't expect anyone special either. In fact, the man with the sleek black car, the polite man who had come last week, was only a memory now. The mechanic thought about that brief meeting sometimes. It was nice that day, but he never imagined that such a person would return. Then, just before noon, a familiar sound reached his ears. A smooth engine sound, the same as before. The old mechanic looked up, and his eyes widened slightly. The black car was back. The same car he had fixed a week ago. It slowed down and stopped right in front of his garage. The driver's door opened, and the polite man stepped out again, smiling warmly. It was Keanu Reeves. The mechanic stood up slowly, feeling both surprised and happy. "Hello again," Keanu said, walking toward him. "I hope I'm not disturbing you." The old mechanic shook his head and smiled gently. "Not at all, you're always welcome." Keanu looked around the small, quiet workshop. "How's business these days?" he asked kindly. The old man hesitated for a moment before answering honestly. "It's been slow. Very slow, but I keep going." Keanu nodded, his face thoughtful. He stepped inside the garage and walked around slowly, looking at the old tools and the photographs pinned to the wall. Pictures from long ago, showing the mechanic as a younger man, fixing cars, laughing with customers, standing proudly beside freshly repaired vehicles. "This place has character," Keanu said quietly. "It feels real." The old mechanic chuckled softly. "It's an old place, that's for sure. Not fancy like the new workshops. But I've spent my life here. Every tool, every scratch, they all tell a story." Keanu listened carefully, paying attention to every word. There was no rush in him, no air of fame or distance. He was simply a kind man, listening with respect. After a pause, Keanu looked the old man in the eyes. "You've been running this garage alone for a long time, haven't you?" The mechanic nodded. "Yes, many years, but business is slow now. Times have changed." There was a quiet moment between them. Then Keanu smiled and said something surprising. "You know, when I left here last time, I couldn't stop thinking about this place and about you. The way you treated me, your honesty, your skill, it left an impression." The mechanic didn't know what to say. He had simply done his job, the same way he always did. "I'll be back soon," Keanu said gently. "I promise." Then he gave the old man a small respectful nod, got back into his car, and drove away. The mechanic stood at the entrance of his garage, watching the car disappear down the street again, just as he had done the first time. But this time, it felt different. Something about Keanu's words and that promise stayed in his mind long after the car was gone. That afternoon, as he wiped his tools and tidied up the workbench, the mechanic found himself smiling quietly. He didn't know exactly what would happen next, but he felt hopeful. For the first time in a long while, he felt that maybe his little garage still mattered. Maybe someone out there saw the value in this small, forgotten place. And that thought alone was enough to warm his heart as the sun began to set. The next morning began like any other day at the old mechanic's garage. He unlocked the creaky door, swept the dusty floor, and put on his work apron. He had no idea that today would be very different. A day he would remember forever. As he sipped his tea, he noticed something strange. A car stopped in front of his garage, not Keanu's car, but another one. Then, before he could finish his tea, another car arrived. Then another. In less than half an hour, the empty lot in front of his garage was almost full. Customers were stepping out, looking around, peeking inside his small workshop. A man walked in first and said, "Are you the mechanic who fixed Keanu Reeves' car?" The mechanic was surprised. "Yes," he said quietly, wondering how this person knew. The man smiled. "We heard about you. We all want our cars fixed here." More people followed, all saying the same thing. Some had simple problems, oil changes, small repairs, while others said they just wanted to meet him. The old mechanic couldn't understand what was happening. He asked one young woman where she had heard about him. She pulled out her phone and showed him a video clip from a popular talk show. There on the screen was Keanu Reeves, sitting comfortably in a chair, speaking to the host and the audience. He was telling a story about the old mechanic. He was kind, humble, and honest, Keanu said in the video. "In this world where everything is fast and sometimes dishonest, he reminded me of real care. He charged me fairly and treated me with respect. I think people like him should be appreciated. His garage may not look fancy, but it's full of heart. If you need your car fixed, go visit him." The audience on the show clapped, and the host smiled warmly, saying, "That's a beautiful story." The mechanic watched the video, almost speechless. His small, quiet garage had suddenly become famous, all because Keanu Reeves had spoken about him on television. He slowly put the phone down and looked at the growing crowd of customers outside. His heart felt full, shocked, touched, and a little overwhelmed. He quickly put on his work gloves and began helping people one by one. The line of cars kept growing, but he didn't complain. In fact, for the first time in a long while, he felt needed again. His tools that had gathered dust were now in full use. His hands, though old and tired, worked carefully on every car, just as he always had. The neighbor from the grocery store arrived later that day, holding another cup of tea for him. She smiled brightly. "You're famous now," she said gently. "Keanu Reeves spoke about you on TV." The old mechanic shook his head slowly, still not quite believing it himself. "I just did my job," he said softly. But it was true. His honest work, his kindness, and his simple way of life had touched someone deeply. And that someone had helped bring life back to this little garage. All day long, people continued to arrive. Some just wanted to shake his hand. Others left kind words and small gifts. The old garage, which had felt almost forgotten just a few days ago, was now full of laughter, conversation, and life. By evening, when the sun began to set, the mechanic finally sat down on his old stool. His back ached from all the work, but he felt happy. Truly happy. He thought about how a small moment, fixing one man's car, had led to all this. A quiet act of honesty had brought people back to his door, and in that quiet moment, sitting there in his old garage filled with noise and new customers, the mechanic felt that maybe he didn't need to give up after all. His garage was alive again, not because of fancy tools or a big advertising sign, but because of kindness, honesty, and a little help from a man who had not forgotten. The next few days were unlike anything the old mechanic had seen in years. His small garage, which had often sat empty, was now full of life. Cars lined up outside from morning until evening, and people waited patiently just for a chance to meet him or get their cars checked by his careful hands. The mechanic worked hard, but he felt grateful. Every repair he did reminded him that his skills still mattered, and every kind word from a customer warmed his heart. He didn't rush the work. He took his time with every car, making sure each repair was done properly, just as he always had. But now, it was different. The people who came didn't just see him as an old mechanic. They called him the honest man and told their friends about their visit. Some even took photos with him, laughing and smiling. By late afternoon, on one busy day, the mechanic realized something important. He couldn't manage this all alone anymore. His body was tired. His hands ached, and even though his heart was happy, he needed help. He looked around at the young faces among the customers and made a decision. He quietly asked one polite young man if he knew anything about cars. The young man's eyes lit up. "Yes, sir," he said eagerly. "I learned some basic repairs, and I've always wanted to work in a place like this." The mechanic smiled gently and said, "Then come tomorrow. I could use a hand." The next morning, the young man returned, ready to work. The mechanic taught him how to handle tools properly, how to listen carefully to customers, and most importantly, how to treat every job with honesty and patience. Soon, the garage became a busy but peaceful place. The old mechanic and his new helper worked side by side, laughing sometimes, sharing stories, and helping more and more people. Even the neighbor from the grocery store visited regularly, bringing tea and smiling warmly at how lively the garage had become. "You've built something beautiful here," she told the mechanic one afternoon. But in quiet moments, when the rush slowed down, the mechanic would pause and think about Keanu Reeves, the man who had spoken kindly about him on television, the man who had helped bring this small garage back to life. He felt thankful but also humble. He knew that the attention wouldn't last forever. One day, people would stop coming just to meet the famous mechanic, and things would return to normal. But this time, he wouldn't feel forgotten. He would remember that, even in a fast-changing world, honesty and kindness still mattered. Every evening, as he locked up the garage after another full day, He felt proud. He hadn't changed who he was. He hadn't advertised or asked for help. He had simply done what he had always done: honest work, careful repairs, and respect for every person who walked through his door. Now, thanks to one man's kindness, the world had noticed that the young helper quickly became like family to him. The old mechanic taught him not just how to fix engines, but how to treat people with fairness and care. He shared stories from his many years of experience, funny moments, difficult repairs, lessons he had learned. And the young helper listened carefully, eager to learn not just how to fix cars, but how to run a business with honesty. By the end of the week, the garage looked almost transformed. Tools were neatly arranged again. The dusty corners had been cleaned. The place felt alive, with laughter, work, and friendship filling the air. But the old mechanic knew that none of this would have happened if not for that one day when a humble man in a sleek black car had needed his help. That single act of kindness, a fair repair, a polite conversation, an honest price, had brought him all this. And now, the old mechanic looked forward to each day, not just for the work but for the people, the young helper who now shared his journey, the customers who came with trust in their hearts, and the neighbor who still brought him tea and reminded him that he mattered. The garage was no longer just a place where cars were fixed. It had become a place of kindness, respect, and second chances, a place where honesty was rewarded, and where even an old mechanic could find joy again. A few peaceful weeks passed. The garage, once forgotten and quiet, now felt alive every single day. The young helper was learning quickly, and the old mechanic felt proud watching him handle tools carefully and treat every customer with respect. Even though his body felt tired at times, the mechanic's heart felt light. The small garage was busy, and people from all over still came, many just to say hello, others bringing their cars for repair, and some simply curious to see the workshop that Keanu Reeves had spoken about. One warm afternoon, while the mechanic was fixing a car with his helper nearby, something unexpected happened again. A black car pulled into the garage slowly, but this time, it wasn't just any car. It was Keanu Reeves himself, returning quietly, without cameras or crowds. The mechanic looked up and smiled, feeling genuinely happy. Keanu stepped out of the car, his warm smile matching the mechanic's. "Hello again, sir," Keanu said kindly. "I promised I'd come back, didn't I?" The mechanic nodded and welcomed him warmly. "You always keep your word," he said gently. Keanu walked slowly around the garage, noticing how much had changed. The tools were well organized, the garage was cleaner, and a young man was working hard nearby. He saw the line of cars waiting outside and smiled. "This place is different now," Keanu said softly. "It feels full of life." The mechanic agreed, but in his quiet way. "Yes," he said, "and much of it is because of you. You didn't forget me. You spoke kindly, and because of that, people started coming again." Keanu sat on an old wooden chair in the corner of the workshop. The mechanic made tea for both of them, and they sat together, just like two old friends sharing a peaceful moment. They talked about simple things, about life, about work, about honesty and kindness. Keanu listened carefully as the mechanic told him stories about when the garage was young, about all the years he had spent here fixing cars, watching the world change around him. At one point, Keanu looked around thoughtfully and said, "You know, this garage is special, not because of me but because of you. People come here because they feel welcome, they trust you." The mechanic felt touched by those words. He never saw himself as special. He simply believed in doing the right thing, being fair, and treating everyone kindly. As they sat there, a few customers peeked in and were surprised to see Keanu sitting quietly, sipping tea. He greeted them politely, but he didn't want attention. He was simply here to visit the man who had helped him, the mechanic who had reminded him of the goodness still left in the world. After some time, Keanu stood up. "I should leave now," he said gently, "but I'll visit again." The mechanic thanked him warmly. "You are always welcome here," he said sincerely. Before leaving, Keanu looked at the young helper and smiled. "You're learning from one of the best," he said, nodding toward the mechanic. The young man smiled proudly. Then Keanu got back into his black car and drove away quietly, just as he had arrived. After he left, the mechanic stood at the entrance of the garage for a moment, watching the road where the car disappeared. He felt a deep sense of peace and happiness. The visit wasn't about fame or cameras. It was simply about respect. Two people who had shared a small but honest connection. The mechanic returned to work, feeling proud not just because Keanu had visited again, but because he had built a place where honesty mattered, where kindness was remembered, and where respect could be shared between two very different people. An old mechanic and a famous actor, sitting together over tea. That evening, as the sun set, the mechanic locked the garage door with a quiet smile on his face. His little garage was alive again, and so was he. Time passed, but the old mechanic's garage stayed busy. The fame from Keanu Reeves' visit slowly faded, but something much more important remained: trust. People didn't come just because they had seen a celebrity mention this garage. They came because they knew the mechanic was honest, patient, and skilled. His small shop, which once felt forgotten, had become a place where people felt welcome. The young helper was learning quickly, gaining confidence with every passing day. The mechanic took time to teach him carefully, not just how to fix cars, but how to treat customers kindly, how to explain problems in simple words, and how to work with pride and respect. The young helper admired the old mechanic's ways. He saw how customers left with smiles, not just because their cars were repaired, but because they felt cared for. One evening, after a long day, the helper sat down beside the mechanic. The garage was quiet now. The tools were put away, and the soft orange light of sunset shone through the open door. "Sir," the young helper said, "one day when you're ready to rest, I'll keep this garage running. I'll make sure it stays the same, honest, fair, and kind." The old mechanic looked at him and smiled warmly. He felt comfort in those words. He had spent decades building this small garage with care, and now it would continue, even after he was gone. And it wasn't just the work that would continue. It was the spirit of honesty and respect. A few weeks later, something special happened. Again, Keanu Reeves sent a letter. It wasn't a fancy letter, just a short, simple message, but it meant the world to the mechanic. In the letter, Keanu thanked the mechanic once more. He wrote that he would always remember the kindness and honesty he found in that small garage, and that he hoped others would continue to support people like the mechanic, people who did good, quiet work without expecting fame or reward. The mechanic framed the letter and hung it on the wall of his workshop. Not because he wanted to show off, but because it was a reminder that simple honesty could touch people's hearts, even people as famous as Keanu Reeves. Life at the garage settled into a steady rhythm. The mechanic still worked most days, but now he shared the work and joy with his helper. The neighbor from the grocery store still brought him tea, and customers still filled the workshop, trusting him and appreciating his care. Sometimes, customers would ask about the day Keanu first came. The mechanic would smile gently and tell the story simply. He came in like anyone else. He needed help, and I helped him, that's all. But deep inside, the mechanic knew that small moment had changed his life forever. It wasn't about becoming famous or having a busy garage again. It was about knowing that honesty still mattered and that people noticed. One quiet afternoon, the mechanic sat outside his garage, sipping tea and watching the sunset. His helper worked inside, laughing and chatting with a customer. The mechanic felt peaceful. His life's work was safe, his values were being passed on, and his small garage, once nearly forgotten, had become a place of trust and kindness once again. And Every now and then, he would think of Keanu, the man who kept his promise, the man who saw value in a simple act of kindness, and the man who helped the world see that even in a small, dusty garage, honesty could shine brightly. The mechanic smiled to himself and whispered quietly, "This is enough. More than enough."